So maybe we could start by just hearing a little bit from you about your background. How long have you been a Foreign Service officer? What kind of positions have you had and posts have you had? And maybe you could give us a little sense of what drew you initially to this line of work.
So I've been in the Foreign Service for 12 years, and I've done a pretty wide range of tours, a lot of sort of short 1-year kind of stints, which makes, when I go through the resume, it makes it sound a lot longer than it really is. But I've done a couple of tours in Saudi Arabia, one of which where I was the sort of liaison to Aramco, the world's largest oil company, and also worked with human rights activists in Saudi Arabia in the Eastern Province. And then from there, I went to London, where I was a staff aide to our ambassador, and it was a really great experience, something I always recommend to folks who are joining the Foreign Service, newly minted officers, because you get a perspective from a leadership sort of perspective, I guess, on how to make decisions and how to look at foreign policy challenges from that height. After that, I went to Baghdad. I was in Iraq as an energy officer. It was an interesting time geopolitically. The Kurds were in talks with Turkey to start sending exports out, which caused a rethink over our whole Kurdish policy, which had been in place for a long time. Probably one of the highlights of my career was I worked in the peace process, the Colombian peace process. So got to travel to the negotiations with our Special Envoy Bernard Aronson, and literally one of the only officials ever, U.S. officials, to meet with the FARC guerrillas and help the team help the Colombians get to an eventual peace agreement, which was achieved. And then from there, I went to Georgetown, taught here a class called U.S. Foreign Policy and Conflict States, which I loved. I loved so much that I taught it again the next year in Georgetown on my own time. And then from there, I did some training, and now I'm in Mexico City. So it's kind of a laundry list, but basically been in for 12 years.
I wonder if you might be able to talk a little bit about identity, and you've talked a little bit about this already, your background, but I wonder if you might tell us how you identify and to what extent any of your identities or cultural background helped you to define and exercise your role as an FSO.
I think that one of the big advantages, and the reason why I always offer to mentor other minorities coming into the Foreign Service is I think that we actually, coming from a diverse background, bring a lot to the table. For me, for example, growing up, jumping between cultural contexts is not challenging. It's actually natural. And I think that conducting diplomacy overseas in particular, it's important to be able to have that ability to really put yourself into that perspective, into the culture in which you're working, and put yourself in that perspective. And I think that adds a lot of value, and it's something that's very personal. Being able to look at things from someone else's perspective instinctually is I think served me well.
Over the course of your career, what has been your overall impression of the State Department's approach to diversity and inclusion issues? And have you seen the department execute any programs or initiatives to actively demonstrate its commitment to diversity and inclusion?
On the whole, the department does value diversity. You see it through programs like the Pickering and Rangel Fellowships. I was a Pickering Fellow. Although it's not exclusively for minorities, it looks at folks who come from disadvantaged backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds in the Foreign Service and brings them in through a sort of streamlined fashion, targeted fashion. I also participated in HECFA, which is the Hispanic Affinity Group at the State Department, and seen efforts made by the Secretary's office and Human Resources to increase diversity. Although it's not always that effective, at least the effort is there and the will, I think. Same, I was on the board of AFSA, our union, the American Foreign Service Association, where again I saw lots of efforts undertaken by our union to prioritize certain issues like unconscious bias and other things. I think that the big exception and the big sort of black mark on the State Department is Secretary Tillerson's tenure, when he targeted to the Pickering and Rangel Fellowships and tried to cancel them, or effectively cancel them. I think that was a big stain on the department's history, and I know that a lot of people within the department and outside the department were very critical in pushing that back, that initiative, which would have certainly destroyed the ranks of minorities coming into the Foreign Service.
You might also tell us about whether you've had any champions or mentors in the State Department, and tell us a little bit about how they might have influenced your career, and perhaps how you yourself have played a role as a mentor.
The first I'd say is Barbara Stevenson, who's currently the president of the American Foreign Service Association, our union. I worked with her in London when I was staff aide to the ambassador, and she was the deputy chief of mission. She was formerly ambassador to Panama. She's one of the most inspiring people I've ever worked for. She's a leader. She's really taught me about putting things in perspective. She's a strategic thinker. She can go to 40,000 feet and then back down to 10 feet within a blink of an eye, like nobody I've ever seen. But what she's really helped me kind of achieve in my career as a Foreign Service officer is sort of like the ability to focus on what's effective. Like, what are you moving the ball down the field, in what you're doing each day. In a bureaucracy, that's really important because we get caught up in process so easy. We focus on process to our own detriment. And a lot of times we end up spending a lot of time doing things that will have no impact at the end of the day. It's sort of like second nature for most bureaucratic institutions or large organizations. And so she always had that ability to see right through it and see if we're really moving the ball down the field and to prioritize. The other person I'd say is Bernard Aronson, who is our Special Envoy to the Colombian peace process, whom I worked with very closely for nearly a year and has remained a good friend. Both Barbara and Bernard remain good friends. He taught me a very different lesson. He was a former assistant secretary in the Western Hemisphere Bureau, but as a political appointee under Jimmy Carter, and then came back President Obama asked him to be the special envoy, so he came back into public service from the private sector to do that. But what he taught me was, when we were facing off with these guerrillas, these FARC guerrillas that we never, the U.S. government had never interacted with formally, and when we sat down, I just didn't even know what to do. Do I shake their hands? And these folks have been, accused of war crimes and atrocities and genocide and all these other terrible things, and or mass homicide is probably a better term. And and so I didn't really know what to do. But at the end of the day, the way Bernie looked at it was like, look, our goal, our mission is to help Colombia achieve peace. Colombian people, through their president, had decided they were going to negotiate with the FARC guerrillas. By going in there with a chip on our shoulder or points to make would not help achieve that goal. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to be treated with dignity.
I wonder if you might tell us how you think your presence throughout your career and your professional contributions have affected the State Department. In what ways and at what levels?
One thing that maybe is more relatable to the folks who are thinking about the Foreign Service as a career is in the last couple of years, it's been important to me out in the field to represent what I think are the core values of American culture and identity, and to reflect those in the way that I behave, in the way that I talk and represent our interests, whether it's meeting with the private sector or civil society organizations or other government officials. I think that's been really something that we all, as Foreign Service officers, really need to think about more than we maybe had in the past, to ensure that folks remember that we care about other people and we respect other people and respect their dignity and their views, and don't just discredit them.
Somewhat broader question. I wonder if you could share with us what has been the most challenging period of time in your career?
It's definitely been the last, I'd say, 2 years. It's for a couple of reasons. One is, I'm at the stage of my career, 12 years in, which I understand from my mentors is not unusual to have sort of a mid-career crisis. I've been doing this thing for 12 years. I'm sort of in the middle to upper ranks now, and I'm not sure if I want to continue, in this career or try something different. I'm a very results-oriented person. It goes back, I think, to my sort of business entrepreneurial beginnings as a young man. Bureaucracy is glacial, and diplomacy is glacial, and for all the high moments, there's a million sort of just moments that aren't really about anything, and so that has been really challenging. I'm really kind of having a soul search a little bit about whether this is a career I want to continue. It's been really great, and I've had so many great experiences, and I'm blessed to have done the Foreign Service, but I'm just not sure if I should continue or not, or if I can put my talents elsewhere for more effect. The other thing I think has just been, kind of what I was talking about before, which is I feel this intense pressure serving in Mexico as a Latino American whose father immigrated from a Latin country, to challenge policies that I find really difficult to support. I'm not really working in the more, I work on energy, which is, there's a lot of agreement, I think, between our countries on these policies. But there are others that aren't so far off that it could be a lot more challenging, especially in the context of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. But at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe we all need to be working towards advancing the U.S. national interests, and so far I feel like I'm helping do that in my job, and so so I'm able to stick with it. But it's been tough. I'm not gonna lie.
I wonder if you might be able to give any advice to your colleagues who might want to support more inclusive teams working on foreign policy but may not know how. How would you encourage allies to further support such endeavors?
It needs to be a factor in their decision-making process, whether it's hiring folks or getting opportunities, professional development opportunities. It doesn't need to be the factor. It shouldn't, in fact, be the factor, but it should be a factor. And it's something that when you put that into account, take that into account, that valuing diversity and ensuring that you have a diverse array of opinions that you're soliciting when you're creating a policy or influencing a policy. I think that more often than not, then you'll end up with a diversity because you're making it a priority. But again, it shouldn't be the only factor. It should just be a factor.
Are there any steps that you would like to see state take systematically or systemically or institutionally to improve the culture or opportunities for diverse leaders from all backgrounds to equitably succeed? And are there any concrete ways that you would recommend?
I think that the one that works in a real effective way, going back to Ambassador Stevenson's sort of motto, is I think that one effective way to do that is in the hiring process, the bidding process within the Foreign Service when people are looking for jobs. The European Affairs Bureau makes it a priority, and they publicize that right on their homepage, right when you're bidding, that they're looking for diverse candidates, that's something that they value and that's important. I think that certainly opens the door to more folks looking at those jobs or looking at that region, and it shows them that their background is actually might be an asset as opposed to a liability. And so I think that is a really good practice that has an effective outcome. The other one too, that recommendation, I guess, and I should say, very, very, these are very humble recommendations. There are folks who are looking at this in AFSA and in the State Department who are much more knowledgeable than I am about how to have these impacts. But one other area that I think makes a lot of sense to me is in the recruitment office, where they recruit Foreign Service officers and go through the whole, they give the oral exams and they select the next generation of Foreign Service officers, is to make a point, again, of having a diverse board that is looking at these folks, board of examiners, and making it a priority that board reflect the diversity with which that we want to see in the Foreign Service.
Is there any advice that you might offer students who might be considering careers in the Foreign Service?
The main advice is the Foreign Service is a lifestyle more than a career. It's something that will define the languages your children speak. It will define the types of food you guys like to eat. I mean, it will define the friendships that your family will have forever. My sister, who's back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, she thinks I'm crazy that I would, move every 2 years and start over every time in a new country. And sometimes I think she's right. But it's something that you just have to go in with your eyes wide open. I'm not one of these guys who will just, one of these Foreign Service types who just go and say it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, everybody should do it, all fine. It's great if it's the right fit for you, if that's the lifestyle you want. If not, then pursue a different career.